who missed it can watch this later if they want to, but I will go through the video and blur out any of participants. So don't worry, we're not going to put your face on the internet, but the recording is on. Anyone else have a favorite tree that they want to tell us about or put in the chat?
I can answer that, Darcy. I've just got too many favorites.
Well, you can just tell us about one or two, and I won't tell the other trees that you didn't mention them.
Okay, I'll show you one of my favorites here, sassafras.
Oh, that's a good one. What do you like about it, Joe?
Well, you can eat the leaf stems, and they taste kind of like Fruit Loops. And you can make tea out of the, yeah, like Fruit Loops. And you can make tea out of the bark of the roots. Plus, the leaves kind of look like ghosts, some of them. So that's cool. And it's fun to say, sassafras.
Great reasons. Last call to share a tree that you're fond of in your life.
I don't have a favorite. Any with no bugs.
That is not an easy tree to find. We had a tree right next to my sidewalk growing up that had white flowers, and the twigs kind of curved upward, almost like a candelabra or something. And I learned when I was an adult that it's called a dogwood tree, but that was one of my favorites because every time I went in or out of my house, I would walk underneath of it, so it kind of felt homey. Well, cool. We have people at a few different forests then today, and something that is kind of cool about trees and forests is they can give you clues about the history of maybe how old the forest is, or what happened there before, how the land had been used before, if it was a farm or logged or just been growing without being interrupted. So we're going to look at a few different forests who have different histories, as well as learn about the trees there. So I think we are going to start with Nate and Madison, who are behind the dairy barn on the Ora E. Anderson Trail, which if you live in Athens, it's a kind of new trail. You might not have been there before, but it is open to the public if you would like to try a new place to hike there near the ridges. So I'll hand it over to you, Nate.
All right, so like Darcy said, and like we talked about earlier, we're back behind the dairy barn, and we're gonna give you a panorama view of where we're standing right now. Because we're definitely in the woods, but it's a little bit different than the woods that you might usually think of. Oops, wrong button. So we can look around, and Madison, just shout out any observations that you're making as we're standing here.
Sure. I noticed that I can see a lot of the sky in this forest.
Yeah, not a very dense canopy. What about like the width of these trees? Are there a lot of really thick trees around us?
Not really. This one is pretty thin, and it looks like a lot of them are just about this size. Just about the size of my arm, not too big at all. These ones are a little bit bigger though.
Yeah.
But those are some of the biggest ones in the forest I've seen so far.
And this forest is kind of a little bit of both thick and thin, because there's some really dense kind of underbrush around us. Like, it's not a very easy forest to walk through, but I wouldn't call it a thick forest either, because like Madison said, we've got a lot of daylight in here, and the trees are small, and there's definitely some space in between them too. So thick and thin at the same time. So if you've ever been in a younger forest, this is kind of what we're looking at. A lot of new growth, some really small trees that are growing. They've got some height to them, but they're not very big. And we've got a lot of species that we would consider pioneer species, ones that are gonna show up right as a forest is just starting to grow and kind of be the pioneers. They're the first couple that start to grow in a new forest. So we're going to take a look at a couple different specific trees in our area, and we'll start off with this one right in front of us.
Have you guys ever seen a tree that looks like this? Like the bark has these deep
I have
grooves?
one in my backyard.
Yeah, it looks just like this.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know what the leaves look like on this tree?
I don't know. I don't know.
Not sure. Yeah, they're pretty high up. It's kind of hard to get a close look at them.
Good on the ground.
Anyone have any words they would use to describe that bark? I realized the chat was turned off. I just turned it back on too in case anyone likes that.
It's kind of squishy. I don't know if you can tell, but I can.
Someone calls it groovy. It does have
Ooh.
pretty deep grooves.
A very
Rough.
groovy.
Looks kind of like a moth.
It does kind of look like a moth.
I think you have moths on the brain.
Touche.
So some folks would call this bark very grooved, like we said, and then it's kind of diamond shaped too. In a lot of places, they make these deep furrows that make the shape of a diamond.
Aaron, I don't know if you'd like this tree. I see a bug on it.
Oh no! Yeah, there's a lot of bugs on that tree in our backyard.
Joe, do you think this could be one of those bugs that cover themselves in lichen?
Is it covered in lichen?
Good question.
It's hard to tell. I don't know if it just has a really funky exoskeleton or maybe it decorated its exoskeleton.
Yeah, it definitely has that round, rotund shape of the lacewing larva.
Cool bug. Cool tree.
Yeah, cool.
Cool bug, cool tree. This is a black walnut tree, and black walnuts are used for a lot of different things by humans. And like we said, in forest ecology, they're one of the first species that starts to show up when a new forest is growing. They often grow in what's called the riparian zone, which is kind of the edge of a habitat when it moves maybe from forest into field, or we can see it right on the edge here, where it's still getting quite a bit of sunlight, even though it's in the forest. Do you know anything about what these trees are used for, Madison?
I've used the black walnuts before as a dye, and I first figured it out on accident. Because when I was younger, I used to really like to rub things on my face. I still do, but I've learned to be a bit more cautious now. And once I took a rotten black walnut, so it wasn't green like this, but it was all decayed and juicy, and I took the juices and smeared it on my face, kind of like a warrior is what I was thinking. And it was stained for about a week. And I had these black marks all over my face for about a week. But you can use those same pigments that I dyed my skin with to dye clothes with too, and I think people have done that for a really long time. They've used it to dye leather and tan hides. That's one use of the tree. What about you, Nate? What do you think you could use it?
Well, first of all, food. I mean, lots of people like to eat walnuts, and they're pretty good.
I'm allergic to the walnut, so I can't have it though.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of tree nuts are an allergy for folks, but walnut trees are where you get a walnut, and they're delicious and they're edible, not just for humans, but for other species in the forest too. So they're helpful for, squirrels and deer and other things that might eat nuts, but they are also like pretty coveted, I'm pretty sure, for like lumber. I'm pretty sure black walnut is a really pretty color when it's cut down and people use it for like tables and other furniture, just because of how pretty it is and how like workable it is while still being nice and strong.
It also seems like, I mean, this tree is very straight and tall, and so are all the other black walnuts around here. So it might be easier to cut into boards because it grows so straight. I'm not sure though. That's just an inference I made.
That's a pretty good observation, I'd say. But yeah, food, lumber, they're good for the rest of the forest just because of their providing food for other animals.
Yeah.
But we've got a few other trees that we'd like to take a look at too. And the next one,
Can I just jump in real quick? Because I also have a black walnut tree behind me coincidentally right now. And you said it was too high up to see the leaves. So I wanted to point out what the leaf looks like. And actually, it's too big where I am. And I have a question of whether you think this is many leaves or one leaf.
Good question.
I don't know, Darcy. That looks like a lot of different things.
Yeah, that looks like a lot of leaves to me, Darcy.
Laura says number one. Yeah, so this is kind of tricky. So leaves on trees are either what's called compound leaves. So this is one leaf. It's called a compound leaf because it's made up of lots of smaller leaves. Or simple leaves. So most of the time, here next to me, this is a violet, right? And it's a simple leaf. It's just one piece. This compound leaf is a whole bunch, but this whole thing would be considered one leaf. And you can tell if you look at the base of it, you see it has that same little shape as you would find at the bottom of a normal singular leaf. And when you look at them attached on the tree, you can see the difference between like the brown twig and the green leaf stem. And I really like walnut leaves. If you do see some of these in your neighborhood or have one in your backyard like Aaron, they have this great smell. And that's pretty cool. So here's another, this isn't from a tree. Here's another leaf. This is also a compound leaf. It's made up of 5 smaller leaves. This is a Virginia creeper vine, and they all fit together in one place. So yeah, that's all. What else do you have in store for us over there in Madison and Nate?
We have another tree that also has compound leaves, but the trunk looks much different.
A little bit scarier, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a little more intense. Look at that. Nate just peeled that right off the trunk of the tree. Can you all see right there?
Wow, that's a lot.
I can't see it very well. Could you guys maybe climb to the top?
Oh yeah, I think Nate was gonna do that for us. So you can see that this tree here, let me switch the camera, sorry. You can see this tree has this pretty elaborate defense mechanism along the trunk of it. Definitely, like Joe said, a tree that you might not want to climb. Here, this just poked me right here. It's a good one. Has anybody seen a tree that looked like this before?
I was playing freeze tag once and I was running down a hill and I almost grabbed one
Oh
to
my.
swing around, but I caught myself at the last minute, but it meant I didn't tag the person that I was close to.
Wow. Well, I'll let you know the name of this tree and we'll tell you a little bit more about it. This is called a honey locust tree, which I think the name at first sounds kind of funny because it doesn't look very sweet or endearing like you might call something honey that you like.
No, not at all.
But its name comes from the sweet nectar inside of the pods. Let's see, the pods drop to the ground later in the year, so most of them seems like I've already decomposed. Oh, here's a good one. Just have to get through all these spikes. Okay, here's a good one. Look how big this pod is. This is what houses the seeds. Here, let me get out of these brambles. Okay, let's see if we can break it up and see if we can find a seed in here. So like I said, there's a sweet nectar inside of these, and that's how it gets its name, honey locust. And that sweet nectar is also very tasty for humans. Humans can eat it. You can kind of see where the seed used to be, but it's, like I said, kind of decomposed. Can you tell? Yeah. So humans can eat this sweet nectar on the inside, but animals really like this. Large grazing animals like to eat these seeds, and it's pretty necessary, from what I read, that these seeds do get consumed because they need to be they need to get scratches on them to help them germinate better. So they need to go through the digestive system, they need to be eaten by an animal, and then they need to be pooped back out for them to be able to germinate and grow a new tree, which I thought was very interesting.
Maya asks, when do the seed pods fall?
In the fall.
In the fall, is that right? Does that sound right to everybody?
Sounds right on the money.
Yep. So they're
Money.
about to fall again, and that's why it was kind of hard to find them, because they probably, a lot of them have been eaten. What kind of animals do you think? I said grazing animals. So do you think a bird would like to eat that seed pod, like a little chickadee?
I was thinking probably giraffes.
Yeah, maybe giraffes. I'm not sure if honey locusts grow where giraffes like to live, but this tree is so old, it grew up with megafauna, so things like mammoths and a giant sloth. It grew up with animals like that, so really big animals that needed a big meal to eat. So both of those animals both the animal and the tree evolved together, and they made this really kind of hardcore punk rock tree.
Which is interesting now because most of the species that are going to eat the pea pod off of the honey locust aren't really deterred by these spikes as much. Like a cow or a deer or a squirrel, they can avoid these thorns pretty easily and they can keep themselves safe from them. But these thorns came about with those giant megafauna, and a giant sloth or a mammoth, this isn't exactly something that they can work their way around. They're just too big to avoid it. And these things are long enough that they would hurt pretty bad.
Yeah, these can put a hole in the tire of a car. That's how strong and tough they are.
They're pretty serious. So it's kind of like a leftover trait from a bygone era. It's not as useful now, and it's more of just a nuisance than anything. When these fall off onto the ground, that's when they hurt cattle because they can step on them and hurt their hooves and their legs. But as far as a deterrent for actually eating them, they don't really work that well anymore.
Yeah, yep.
Leftover.
Yeah, farmers don't really like to have these near their fields, like Nate said, because when the spikes fall off, they can get stuck in the cow's hooves, and if that goes undetected for a while, it can lead to an infection, and it can really hurt their livestock. So farmers try to keep these out of their pastures as much as they can, and that can be kind of like a bit of a challenge because, like we said, this is a pioneer species, so they would love to pop up in a pasture just like this. This was a pasture, I don't know, do you think 50 years ago? Does that sound right, maybe?
That sounds right to me.
So you can see these trees would pop up pretty fast, maybe in a farmer's field.
Definitely tough to work around, and they have good, high quality, strong wood, but they don't really grow to be that big, and there's not really that many of them. That there's really just not much of an industry for this type of wood, so they're not like highly coveted or anything. But if you did have to take one down, it's definitely wood that you could use. And like we said, they're kind of like ecological niches that they provide food to the forest, just like the walnuts do. And they're another one of those pioneer species that just kind of pop right up when a new forest is starting to grow. So they've got uses for both the natural world and for ours, just like that black walnut.
Yeah, here's the leaves. Can you see? It might be hard to see from underneath. There we go. Can you see? So they're also compound, just like the black walnut leaf that Darcy was able to show us. So from the tip of these 2 leaflets all the way down to the base. That is 1 leaf of the black walnut tree, and it has lots of these little leaflets. I mix up all this. Does anybody have any questions about either of the trees that we just showed you or about pioneer species at all? We could show you one more pioneer species. It's invasive if you'd like to hear, or we could move on to the old growth forest if you all are itching to move on.
Show us the invasives, because I think that is something that you might expect to see in a young forest around here.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
Can you remind us what an invasive species is, if that's a new term for some people?
Yeah, sure. So I always like to think of invasive species. I like to start with the word invader, like an alien invasion. Like aliens are from a whole nother planet and they came here just like this plant. It's from a whole different ecosystem and it was introduced somehow. I actually don't know how this plant was introduced. It has a really tasty fruit. Oh, I think it's because it's pretty. Is that why people planted it? Because they like to plant it around their houses?
Maybe like a landscaping plant that, you know, turned into a plant that wasn't just in people's yards anymore. That's how a lot of invasive species come about.
And like I said, this plant has a very tasty fruit, so that's how it got spread so easily. It has this bright orange berry on it in the fall time, like towards the end of summer. And birds like to eat it, and I'm sure squirrels and deer. And then just like the honey locust tree, they poop it out and they spread it, and that's what helps it grow. So this plant right here is the invasive autumn olive. So autumn like the season, and olive like you get on a salad. It's pretty easy to identify, I think, and maybe that's just because I've had so much practice seeing it because it's everywhere. So the way I identify it is I start with the leaves, and you can see this is one single leaf right here. It's simple, so it's just one, and it's an oval shaped, and it's smooth, I guess, on the
Kind of
edge.
waxy looking.
Yeah, pretty waxy, and then on the underside, I don't know if the camera picks it up very well, but it has like a silver sparkle to it, and that's what I meant when I said it's very pretty. And I think it's because of this like iridescent, almost kind of glow that it has, and I think that might be why people like to plant it around their houses. And then each of those leaves are opposite from each other, so they're directly across from each other, and it is everywhere. There's a plant right here, there's a plant back there. I mean, I probably have 6 or 7 plants within arm's reach right here. That's how prolific, that's how easily spread it is. And like Darcy said, invasive species you can usually find in a pioneer forest because, like we talked about earlier, there's so much sunlight on the forest floor. Like there's lots of gaps in the canopy for the sun to shine through to the forest floor. So this understory of these woody shrubs that grow on the bottom get lots of sunlight and have lots of room to expand because there's so much room in between all of these trees. Does that make sense?
I think you did a pretty good job of explaining that. And I mean, something to keep in mind with our invasive species here as well is that invasive species are, it depends on where you are. I mean, like these pioneer species that we're talking about here, we like because they start forests very quickly and they're native to this area. So they provide for our animals that we have here. But an invasive species that comes from somewhere else and leaches different things out of the soil and might not provide as much for the other wildlife that we have, that's when something's really invasive. So our honey locust trees and our black walnut and our Osage orange, they might be considered invasive or a nuisance if they were in somebody's farm field or if they were overseas in like Pakistan or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But we like them here, and I'm sure that the autumn olive is a nice starter plant wherever it comes from.
I guess one of the things I like to think about, like, what does the plant do? Like, what's harmful about this autumn olive plant right here? And like I said, it grows really fast, so it can take over a whole forest floor very fast. And then that doesn't leave room for other plants that like to grow in this forest floor, like stinging nettle or some really valuable wildflowers that would like to grow here. They don't have room to grow because of all this autumn olive that's kind of taking over this understory, which is quite an issue. But one really cool thing about the autumn olive is, like I said, those tasty berries. They're pretty good. Humans can eat them too. Make sure that you're very sure that you're eating an autumn olive berry before you eat anything. Make sure you know what it is, but they're really tasty and they're kind of tart, like sour Skittles. That's kind of what they remind me of. And they're bright orange and they have that same like silver speckle on them. And they're really tart because they have a lot of pectin in it, and pectin is usually what you add to grapes to make jelly. But if you wanted to make jelly with autumn olive berries, you don't have to use any pectin because it already has so much in it. So people make jellies out of it, and I think you can make drinks out of it too, like juices and wines, but I'm not too sure about that. I know you can make jelly, that's for sure.
Does anyone have any questions about invasive species in our area or about autumn olive in particular?
What you were saying really made me think a lot about how much of this game of who gets to grow where when is all about light and shade. Like you pointed out how it's a really bushy, dense forest at the level where you would walk, but there's not a lot of cover up high. And that's probably why there's so many bushy plants like the autumn olive, is because there's so much light coming down between the trees that they can grow really well. But then that means even smaller plants that would grow underneath of them can't get light anymore. And if you have an older forest with a thicker canopy, you might not have so many of those bushy plants that keep you from walking through it.
Yeah, it's definitely important to consider like the age of the forest when thinking about how healthy it might be, because forests will look different even in the same area depending on how long they've been there and what's been allowed to grow.
Well, thank you for introducing us to this forest. And then I think Danny was going to go over a little bit of review of. Are you in a good spot to share?
Yeah, I think I'm good. So Darcy talked a little bit about the simple versus compound leaves, and I have some more examples to show you guys. I want to take a look at this tree right here. Joe mentioned it too. It's the sassafras. And one thing I wanted to mention was that the leaves actually have 3 different like shape variations. So this one, Joe said it looks kind of like a ghost. I think it looks like a dinosaur track or something like that. So this is one variation that the leaf could have. And then another shape is this little one right here. It's like, it kind of looks like a mitten to me. And then the last one is just kind of like this round oval. So it's interesting that it has such like different variations. And this one is an example of a simple leaf because it's not divided. It doesn't have a bunch of little leaflets. If we move just to this tree right here, this is an American beech. And American beech trees are really cool because they have a really, really smooth bark. It's not rough like at all. It's very smooth. And the leaves of this one, these are compound leaves. So all this part right here, these are all leaflets. And I can zoom in. I like American beech because they kind of look like razored on the leaf. They're like very straight lines that go all the way to the end of the leaf.
And those actually, a beech has simple leaves. And if you look at where the leaf attaches to the twig, it kind of has that little, you know how at the base of a leaf it kind of widens out a little bit? You might see that, the way it attaches.
Oh, okay. It is kind of complicated.
Yeah, it definitely can be, take some practice.
And American beech, another easy way to identify this is it has, hopefully you guys can see it on my phone, it kind of has like a little spike at the very end of the twig here. So there's that like little brown spike. and that's a good way to identify it. And then I wanted to move over this one. Have you guys seen these leaves before? Can you tell? Anyone know what this tree is?
Reminds me of Canada.
Maybe some syrup of some kind? Not a
Maya
Christmas
got it.
tree.
She
of
says maple.
the same.
Joe, it's not a
Nice.
Christmas tree. I mean, if you want it to be a Christmas tree, it could.
You could dress it up with some lights and, yeah, some bells and whistles. But you're right, this is a maple tree. And what do you guys notice? What's going on with this leaf here? It's kind of on all of them. Someone said freckles. Yeah. So I don't know what this is caused from. It might just be caused from bacteria, but maybe an insect of some kind was munching on these leaves. I'm not sure. But there's definitely holes and weird stuff going on. So maybe some caterpillars were munching on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's from a tiny, tiny caterpillar
Very tiny
that will turn
one.
into a moth.
Cool. I don't know any caterpillars that have like a host for maple, so I'll have to look that one up. And then this one here, have you guys seen this before? This is one of my favorite trees. It's very tiny. It's kind of growing weird. Erin, do you know?
I've seen it in like my front yard, but I've seen it before.
They're kind of all over the place. I'm in South Park, and they're not growing very tall. Like, that might be the tallest one that I see right now. And then there's that giant tree with a canopy up there. So these look like they're kind of growing in the undergrowth. And I see them all the time when I'm hiking around Athens. And this is actually a pawpaw tree. So these giant leaves, this is a simple leaf because, like Darcy was saying, you can see the base of the leaf as it attaches to the stem. That's the like terminal bud area. So these are huge leaves. It's like almost as big as my hand. But has anyone heard of pawpaw trees before? What makes them so cool? What makes them special?
Well, their name is the same word for what some people call their grandpas.
The grandpa tree, that's what I'm going to start calling it now. I see some more insect holes. Something was munching on it. What makes this pawpaw so cool to me is that they can grow an edible fruit called the pawpaw fruit. And we actually have a festival about them, the Pawpaw Festival, every year. And they're really, really yummy to eat. Some people think they kind of taste like a mango and a banana mixed together. But the texture is really weird. I think they're really good, though. Woo! Just kicked a tree on accident. Sorry, tree. Let me see.
Susan says they
And then-
made ice cream and bread out of the pawpaws.
You
but
made
Erin asked
bread?
what it looked like. Yeah, like zucchini bread or banana bread or something like that.
Oh, okay. That sounds yummy.
I'm going to screen share for a second so people can see what the pawpaw looks like, and then I'll send it back to you.
Yay, can't wait to see it.
So, yeah, you can see it's kind of big, and it has these pretty seeds. I've seen people make jewelry out of them, or sometimes I find them in raccoon poop, and I know that it must be pawpaw season. And the inside, that like soft, custardy, almost pudding-like thing. You can see they'll grow on the under. If you don't look underneath the leaves, you might not see them because they grow on the underside of them. They get pretty big. And really, when they're ready to eat, they almost look rotten. Like you really want them really soft and on their way.
Wow, they look cool.
Yeah, they'll be ready early, middle of September. All right, I'm putting you back on Spotlight, Danny.
Okay. So one more tree I wanted to show you guys, the little tiny one. This is a good example of compound leaves. I used to think like that was a leaf, 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 but this is actually, this whole thing here is a leaflet. Or these are leaflets, right? And this whole thing is a leaf. Tree ID is
You got it.
and so this is an ash tree. Has anyone, like, do they know why ash trees are talked about so much in forest ecology?
It's where most of our baseball bats come from.
Ooh, heavy hitters. So does that make it, I don't know, a strong bark, a strong wood? Or is it softer? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's hardwood, but it's also kind of famous for being able to take repeated blows. Like that's why it's good for a baseball bat. It's kind of crazy.
Oh. Well, this is a really, really tiny one. And I wondered if you guys have heard of ash trees before, because there's this really invasive insect called the emerald ash borer that loves to eat the leaves of ash trees. It lays its eggs, and the larva bores into the bark of the ash tree, and it actually does a lot of harm to the ash tree. So it's good that I see this one, but I wish it was a little bit bigger. So I found some husks of some seeds here. I have 2 of them. This one, the inside of it, I don't know if you can see, but it has like these weird like black dots in it, almost like eggs or something. I don't know.
Ugh.
But
That is not a seed. You may be more on
Oh.
track with the eggs. Anyone have any ideas about what that casing might be for? It was made by a tree, but it is what's called a gall, Gall. And this is something that insects, yeah, Susan knows an oak gall. So basically, I don't know what kind of insects makes these kinds. They come in all different shapes and sizes, but the insect landed on the oak tree and started laying its eggs. And when the insect does that, the oak tree responds to that when it feels the insect on there. It triggers it to grow and make this kind of little protective home for the insect's seeds. So this one, it looks like the eggs have already hatched and left. You might see little holes on the outside where they chewed their way out. And maybe some of those little black pieces might even be a little bit of insect poop left behind. That's kind of what it looks like to me, but it's hard to tell. So it's kind of crazy because like if you look at the DNA of that oak gall, it's made up of the oak tree's cells, but the insect got the tree to make it for its own purposes.
Wow, that is crazy. I thought it might have been like a buckeye husk pod or something. That is wild. Well,
it is
it
does kind of look like that.
Yeah, it's like kind of bumpy on the outside. Well, I'm glad I got to touch some insect poop for you guys. And then, has anyone seen these before when they're walking?
You found my pig's nose.
They're very cute. So this came from Pig Nut Hickory, I believe, but I'm not.
Monkey shape of it. Like it looks like a monkey, like a shape of it.
It does kind of look like it, doesn't it? All right, and I think that is all the cool things that I could find. Oh, here's a good example of a simple leaf. And you can see how it's an oak leaf. So they're in alternate, all the leaves are in alternate fashion on this twig. But let's learn about old forests. Joe, are you ready?
I was born ready. Actually, that's not true. I didn't know anything about trees when I was born. Well, I'm here in a forest near Big Bailey Wetland, which is near the village of Chansey, and I'm on the Wayne National Forest. I'm going to show you what I'm looking at here. Okay, lots of trees, huh? And I'd like to know how these trees are surviving. How are they getting their food, their sustenance? What's tree food? Yes, exactly. They're making their own food basically from the sunlight. And sometimes they go to McDonald's. And I just don't get tired of thinking about this miracle that these trees are just making their own sugars from the sun's energy. And they also need some minerals and from the ground and things like that. But the whole rest of this ecosystem is dependent upon that one phenomenon of photosynthesis. You can see there are, hopefully I'll get a chance to show you some mushrooms that are in the forest floor, and they're consuming, well, some of them are consuming this leaf litter, and of course that comes from the trees. There's, there's really important food for deer, turkeys, squirrels, black bears that trees produce. Deer will just like browse and other things browse right on the leaves as well. A lot of the birds in this forest are eating caterpillars off of the leaves. So literally everything here is depending upon these trees for life. So if aliens came to Earth and I was in charge of teaching them about our planet, I would definitely start with trees. And I was walking around while everyone else was talking and finding some things to show you, so I'll try my best to find them in reverse order. But this is a hickory. I'm not quite decided on what kind it is, but it's got this really lacy bark, and it's these are the nuts from this hickory. And this is one actually from this year. You see how it's green? It's got some kind of like raised ribs on the nut, and that's one indicator of the species that I can't remember. If it was a pig nut, it would have like a pig's nose kind of on the, let's see if maybe this is a better view. And you kind of see it has like a pig's snout there, so this could be a pig nut. But some other possibilities would be bitter nut. So I think those are our two options. But this is one of the biggest ones that I've ever seen. And hickories are really slow growing, very dense wood. Takes them a long time to get big. So it's pretty neat.
Yeah, if you imagine for a second, probably most of you have seen like the trees of the ring and heard like, I can count all the rings and see how old the tree is. So with a hickory tree that goes slowly, each year it just grow a little bit, those rings will be really tight and really close together. But a tree that grows really fast, like say a sycamore tree, each of those rings would be really big and have lots of space in between them. It's not bad.
I think trees are also kind of amazing because the only part of this tree that is alive, I mean, of course the leaves are alive, but also the inner bark just behind this outer bark here. You can see on this red oak, like the inside of the tree is already kind of like spilling out, it's decomposing in there, like turning kind of into sawdust. Looks like maybe some ants are helping that process along. And it's like already, the inside of the tree is already turning into soil. But it's still standing, still alive. And this is might be hard to tell, but this is a pretty big red oak. And one of the things that helps me to know it's red oak is those silvery strips that are running down the side of the tree there on the bark. It's kind of a good way to tell.
Yeah, so interesting with what you're saying, Joe, about how just the outside of the tree is the part that's alive and that all the water and nutrients and everything moves through the inside, just kind of just dead wood. When pioneers were settling the US and trying to clear these big forests, make room for their farms, and they didn't have power tools, right? They couldn't use chainsaws. What they would do is do what's called girdling the tree. They just cut a circle all the way around the tree on every side so that the water nutrients couldn't flow up and down it anymore, and then the trees would die and fall over in the next year or so. So that's something to think about if you ever see people like carving into trees, is that, that's why it can really hurt it, is because that's actually like that's the part of the tree that's actually doing all the work.
Yeah, behind those silvery strips, the food from the leaves is traveling down towards the roots, and the water that the roots are taking in is traveling up behind those silvery strips, up to keep the leaves happy. I've only found one of these around here, but this is actually a plant called ghost pipe, and you can see it is not making its own food. It's not green, so it's not doing any photosynthesis, but it is a flowering plant. Like that's a flower there. And this is, I think they're still trying to figure out exactly the life cycle of this plant, but it's feeding off of the dead leaves in the soil. So it's always really cool to see those. And one thing that doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, is how important dead trees are. And also, hopefully we'll see a few more examples of why. But these downed, this is a broken off branch of this red oak. It fell a long time ago, and it's providing habitat for, rodents that travel under the log here. Sometimes you can break off pieces of this and find like insects that are in there, especially in the winter. They'll burrow in there and spend the winter inside the soft, decomposing wood. It looks like a little spider web in there. So it's like salamanders could be under there. Really important habitat for a lot of things. And then, sorry if I'm making you seasick while I'm walking, but so one interesting thing to consider is that almost all of our forests in Ohio, at one time or another, they have been logged. And I'm towards the top of a ridge here, so this was probably like a pasture at some point. And now it's growing back. It has already grown back into a forest. Kind of like Nate and Madison, where they were seeing that happen at kind of a different stage. Sorry, I can't pass this up. This is, I just forgot the name of it. It's in the genus Selene. It's like one of the catch flies. Starry something. This is a really nice looking one. Cool fringy flowers. And so this side of the ridge where I just came from is facing towards the east. So it gets the sunlight in the morning, which is, usually see different species on the east facing slopes because they're a little bit more moist. So, it's really shaded. You can have things like red oak and this sugar maple. You can kind of see that the branches are coming out straight out at a 90-degree angle. That's one indicator that you're looking at a sugar maple. And then, of course, you can also, this time of year, look at the leaves. So yeah, this is where maple syrup comes from. So they also prefer a little more shade, a little more moisture. And then you can maybe see the difference right off the bat in the forest on the west facing slope, and see if I can find the other things I already found again. But it's a little more open. You have trees like this white oak here that like more sunlight. They need a more open forest to grow. So you have things like white oak, and the bark is usually very light. It's a little bit flaky. And maybe we can find an old white oak leaf. No, but did find a chestnut oak leaf. And this another tree I wanted to point out.
You've mentioned a lot
This
of different oak trees, Joe. Would you say that around here that's a sign of a more mature forest?
yes, I would. They're usually not one of the first trees to colonize a forest. So even though they need a lot of light to germinate and to grow, they're usually not like a first tree species to, colonize like an old pasture or something. So yeah, around here, like in this forest, I'll definitely see, if I'm looking at big oak trees of a variety of species, big beech trees, and what was the other one I was thinking of? Yeah, hickories. That would definitely be an indicator that it's a more mature forest. But definitely the size of the trees, looking around to see if there are big trees that have already fallen, like they've already grown, they've died, and they've fallen over. That's kind of an indicator that the forest has been, relatively left alone for quite a while. So this is yet another type of oak, chestnut oak. It has these reddish orange crevices in the bark. This is a pretty small one, but they grow like in some of the driest, rockiest places around here on our ridge tops. And like there's a couple more chestnut oaks. The larger ones have these really bumpy, they got really bumpy bark. And then there's a young chestnut oak. They don't have like a classic oak leaf shape necessarily. They have these, the scientific name is Quercus montana. So I always think of these, Montana like mountains. Think of these as like mountain slopes. Quercus montana. Okay.
A few more minutes. Does anyone have any tree questions or things they want to share? I know someone asked in registration about, they said that they had a blue spruce that seemed to be having some trouble, and they had heard that it might be some kind of mite that does that. Now, blue spruce, I think, are something that's usually planted around here. I don't think we have a lot of ones that grow natively, so I don't know a lot about that. Do you know anything about that, Joe?
Well, yeah, spruce are usually like a much more northern species. Like they really like moisture and seems like cold weather. So they're really not very well suited for Ohio. I have seen some like out kind of near Wildcat Hollow that are huge and just somehow managed to survive. But yeah, definitely planted. Unless it's like kind of a crazy bog type thing that I don't know about in Ohio. I don't think we really have any native spruces. I just found another oak leaf apple gall from last year. A couple other cool things about, if other people have questions, feel free to interrupt me. But white oaks in particular, and also some hickories, like this looks like maybe a young shagbark hickory. They get a lot of caterpillars on them, so they're really important for foraging birds, like one of my favorite birds, the cerulean warbler. they spend most of their time foraging on hickories. So, this might be a little tiny gull from some kind of insect. But, this time of year, especially now that we've had a little rain, it's good to spend a little time perusing these leaves to see if you can find any caterpillars. And that's kind of where I'm heading, is that I did find one caterpillar that I was hoping to show you guys if it's still there.
Yeah.
But this,
to leave, I understand, but we'll hang on and let you show us the caterpillar.
okay, let's see if I can. Oh yeah, I'm almost there.
Yeah. Carrie also asked while you're walking whether trees and plants breathe.
Whether they what?
Whether they breathe.
Breathe?
Mm-hmm.
They certainly do. They have a couple different structures to do that. One is called a stomata, which is on the leaf. And the other is a lenticule on the bark. And they have, but most of the exchange happens through the leaves. So they're mostly taking in carbon dioxide, which is great for us, and they're expelling oxygen. Oh wow, it's a cool spider.
Yeah, on some leaves, if you turn them over, you can kind of see they're like little dots, like little pores, and those are the stomata on the leaves that take in the air, and they use
Finally.
it as part of their photosynthesis to make food and then let it out again. Ooh, and here's the caterpillar. What is it attached to there, Joe?
It's on a young black oak leaf, but this is the head right there. It's got these kind of crazy looking eyes.
I see. I thought that was like a little nut or something, but it's its head.
Yeah, I can't wait to look it up. So if I was a warbler, I'd be a happy camper.
One more note about plants breathing is there's a cool experiment you can do if you want to see it in action or see evidence, is you can take a plant and like the whole plant, the roots, leaves, everything, so it's still alive, and put it under a glass in a bowl of water, and you add some baking soda to the water, which is like carbon dioxide, which is what plants breathe. We breathe the oxygen and they breathe the carbon dioxide. And if you leave it under a light, it'll start doing photosynthesizing and breathing, and you will see little bubbles start to come in the water. And those bubbles are it releasing the oxygen after taking in carbon dioxide. Maybe if I send out the recording, I can send out directions for that experiment. But it's kind of fun to see the bubbles as proof of the plant's breath.
Darcy, I got one more tree for people who want to hang on. But of course, if you guys need to take off, I understand. But if you've never seen a scarlet oak before, there's one right over here. This is an oak tree or a species of oak that is not like, I never see big groves of scarlet oak. So it's always neat to see. And it's got bark, it's pretty dark, kind of like a black oak, and then also has some silvery strips, but they're usually skinnier than red oak. And see these dead branches that are still on the tree lower down. That's like the most important indicator for me, is those lower dead branches that it keeps. And then the leaves, probably hard to see, but they're really lacy, like they have deep armpits.
I appreciate you pointing out the shape of the branches. The shape of a tree can help you identify it. It's not something people often think of. They think of like the bark, but if you sort of stand back and see, are they reaching out or up? Are they crunched together? Are they spread out? That can be a great clue. Oh yeah, look at how deep those leaf armpits are.
They smell good too, the armpits. Yeah, just one last look at the old scarlet oak.
Wow, it's so tall.
Okay, my work is done.
Susan did a quick search and has a preliminary identification of the green caterpillar as a silver-spotted skipper caterpillar.
Oh yeah, that sounds like it could be. I know they have that. They definitely have that weird head. No offense to them. But also there's some moth caterpillars in the prominent, like prominent moths. That was kind of my first impression. But silver spotted skipper definitely sounds like that could be right also. Thank you, Susan.
All right, well, thank you all for coming today. If you have more tree questions, feel free to send them to us. Darcy@ruralaction.org is my email. And the next 2 weeks, we're planning on doing some activities on Southeast Ohio culture, some of the history and the things that make this place unique. But we're open to ideas for what we do on the field trips after that, if there's anything you want to see. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Darcy. Thanks, everybody.
Ooh, fungi, that's a great idea. Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, fun guy.
Yeah, if it
Bye,
keeps
nice
raining,
to see you.
especially.